Hello, everyone. We are so incredibly excited that you are here with us to talk about how to be more trans and queer affirming in your classrooms and your curriculum and just in your life. This is a National Educators United Town Hall that is also sponsored by the Black Lives Matter at School Steering Committee. I just want to introduce you to myself really quickly so you know who's talking at you. My name is Stephanie Price. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. I identify as a mixed race Black queer woman, and I am just so proud to be able to say all of those things. And I think the reason that we need to talk about trans and queer affirming curriculum and just trans and queer affirming living trans and queer affirming lives is that I wasn't always comfortable with saying those things, right? I grew up in the Bible Belt, and there was a time when I couldn't be fully who I am. And because I had people who were affirming of my queerness, I was able to love that part of myself. So it's important. So we're having this town hall as a remembrance of trans folks who have paved the way for us in this world, and also for queer folks who have paved this way, and also as a celebration of that, right? The National Black Lives Matter at School Steering Committee has created a year of purpose, and the year of purpose is November's focus was Transgender Day of Remembrance, and that figure was William Dorsey Swann. And the January, it was queer organizing, and the figure was Bayard Rustin. So just that celebration of Black, queer, and trans folks in our history and in our present. So National Educators United is a group of people who have been working together across states to build a movement for education, and a movement that is about educational equity. And that is why we do the work that we do, because we believe that it is important to create schools and public education that is equitable for all of our students. If you could introduce yourself in the chat, drop your name, your pronouns, your title, your role, maybe something about why you're here. And then also if you could share this live feed to a group that you're a part of that you love, or to your own Facebook page. We want people to know that this event is happening, because these conversations are incredibly important. As you are dropping your names into the chat and just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit more about who you are, I want to direct you to the image. Oh, I apologize. My son's school is calling me to tell me that he didn't attend one of his classes today. Virtual learning, you know. So I want to direct you to the next couple of slides. There's a week of action picture, and that is the logo for this coming year. The logo was created by a student, Naima Whitted, and that is the contest winner of, I know we're having some slide issues, but it'll get there, I promise. Naima was the contest winner for the Black Lives Matter at School logo challenge for 2021. And this is why we're here, and this is why we're doing the work that we do. It's a week of action, a year of purpose, a lifetime of practice. And this is a student created design. We ask students and the youth to create designs every year, because the youth voice is incredibly important in changing the culture, and also in teaching us the lessons that we need to know, right? So the Black Lives Matter at School year of purpose started last year. I was going to say this year, but last year technically. And it came after several years of the Black Lives Matter at School movement, which actually started originally in Seattle. So it was in Seattle during the fall of 2016, when thousands of educators came together to wear shirts that celebrated Blackness. Black Lives Matter, we stand together, and also say her name. And it was to raise awareness about state violence and the assault of women in our country. That effort was not without its challenges. There were people who called in a bomb threat. There were threats. There was opposition to that. But at the end of the day, they still all came together to show their support and to celebrate that. That was the very beginning, that spark of the movement. And then it grew and carried over into Philadelphia. And then eventually, you know, the steering committee came together and really formed the national movement for the Week of Action. So now we move into this year of purpose, which is because that uprising for Black lives is a way to, that uprising for Black lives, you know, it can't just be contained into 1 week of action, right? It can't just be contained into February for Black History Month. Blackness, Black joy, Black struggle, Black excellence, you can't pack it into 1 month. It is so far beyond that. We have to celebrate the beauty of Blackness every day of the year, right? So they created the Year of Purpose, and it's really asking educators to reflect on their own work in their relationship to anti-racist pedagogy and abolitionist practices. And that takes, like you saw in the logo, a lifetime of practice. And it's vital to have these conversations and also to be intersectional in these conversations, because you can't talk about Black lives mattering if you don't talk about Black queer lives. You can't talk about Black lives mattering if you don't talk about Black trans lives. You can't talk about it if you don't talk about women. It's just, there's so much that is all interconnected. And in order to do this work, we really have to make a commitment to being intentional. So I just am really happy that we are in this moment and this space here together to talk about what it means to be intersectional in our approach and to affirm our students who need it the most. I want to tell you, we did have a little bit of change in our lineup, and we will go into that in a little bit. We have some amazing speakers who are here to talk to you. But the first thing that I want to do, if I can find it on my phone, I get a little nervous when I talk about these things that I really am so excited about. I want to introduce you to our MC. I'm incredibly thrilled that our MC could join us. They are Ebo Barton, and Ebo comes from SALT, from the moment before worlds converge. Oh, I love that. Ebo Barton comes from SALT, from the moment before worlds converge. In this world, we are still trying to articulate that mixed Black and Filipino, transgender and non-binary queer artists and educators not only matter, but are precious. In another world, Barton is loved, safe, and valued. The only difference being that the latter is a path that they must make themselves. Ebo, I am so glad to have been able to read those words. Like, that hit. If you all weren't aware, Ebo is actually a poet. Hope you can tell from the bio. And it is my absolute honor to introduce you to Ebo and pass over the mic. Ebo, take it away. Thank you
so much. I appreciate it. Thank you all so much for having me here. Give it up for yourselves for taking time out of your days to be here at this and learning something. I'm so excited. Shout out to educators, but also shout out to the young people that are actually the educators. Shout out to all those folks, and give me an emoji or a reaction or something if you are here wanting to learn some more about what you do in the world. An emoji or even a face expression of your own, perhaps. I can take, there you go. Yeah, I love it. That's wonderful. So I'm excited to be here, but I'm going to share a poem real quick. Does that feel okay with everyone? Cool. Okay, most people are saying yes. Other folks are watching 90 Day Fiance. That's okay. It's all right. I'm still going to be here. It's okay. So the first poem I'm going to read to you is inspired by Beyonce, because who's not inspired by Beyonce? And it's about my freedom. And I hope that you find something in your freedom as well in this poem. When I came out to my mother, her first reaction was to comment on the volume of my voice when I said transgender, as if being myself in public wasn't already loud. I lowered my voice. Do you reach adulthood when your parents' reactions to your unblossoming start to sound hollow like an empty cage? When you look into a mirror and discover you are the only and ugliest salvation your family ever inherited? Do you reach full-grown adulthood when your reflection rejects you in your second language? The language you kept safe in your back pocket is an exhausted compass that only points towards the ocean. What about respect for my elders means mute myself? Are you still an adult if you just want to go home? I learned that being free isn't what everyone wants, especially if you find custody convenient. And I know you think my gender makes you angry, that your Jesus did not die for this, but the truth is, my gender binds you to fear, uncovers your discomfort from seeing the rapture of my reach, these bare wrists. What about my freedom scares you? I named myself Igbo to worship the slave rebellion that drowned their captors, rose into the sky, turned into birds, and flew back home. Why would you deny me this worship? Why would you keep this story trapped in a book? And don't mistake me for fearless. It's taken me a whole lifetime to get back home, but I'm still willing to come back for you if you want to come. Jaden Smith's skirt, Billy Porter's entire wardrobe, Lizzo's exposed thong, Monroe Bergdorf's middle finger, Zaya Wade, Harriet Tubman, my beard, my pronouns, my lips blossoming on a shoulder blade. We are the efflorescence of eternal imagination. So shame, trying to convince you compromises the wind, cradling my wings, so stay in bliss. But ask yourself, are you free? Or are you conditioned to this captivity? Whatever the answer is, please let me live. I just want to go home. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate you listening to that. I'm also the product of Los Angeles Unified School District. I hope I didn't make anybody cringe. I'm doing okay. I'm here. I'm learning. I'm growing. I made it out. I'm in Seattle, Washington now. Don't know how, that's a long story. We're not going to get into that. But I did want to say much respect and props to Channing Gerard Joseph, who was unable to make it today. But we are sending mad love and respect that way. But the next person I'm inviting to speak is Victor Ultra Omni. Did I say that all correctly? Yes. Because I would have definitely done it again. Please give an emoji for Victor, please, on just to welcome Victor to the virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Ibo, and thank you so much for that offering. That was such helpful grounding in what I'm ready to talk to y'all about today. So yeah, on the screen right now is who I am. It's my bio. But what I'm really excited to talk about, and we can move on to the next slide. Whoever's controlling the slides, I'll just say when you can move on. But this will be here for a good minute, is to talk about Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin is someone whose legacy we could sit on here and talk about for many hours. So we're gonna do some highlights, some cliff notes. But what's really, I'm so excited to be here for so many reasons, but I think, this quote for me is why I'm so happy that Black Lives Matter at school is focusing on Bayard Rustin, because as educators, as young people who are at the center of why we're all here, it's crucial to think about how we are continuing to challenge power. And Bayard Rustin's complex legacy is the epitome of that. So yeah, I just wanted to sincerely start off by saying, thank you to Black Lives Matter at School Week for existing, for reaching out to me and inviting me, and for letting me have some time with you today to reflect on, a really important living ancestor. So, I graduated high school in 2015, which feels like millenniums ago now, but as a young transmasculine Black student who was coming into my political identity during Black Lives Matter, there was not a network of teachers who were able to speak about these issues, to speak about my identities. So, in joining together, and I think that's what, Dr. Joseph would have shared with us today, is the first part of gathering. When William Dorsey Swann held balls in DC, in the very recently antebellum South, the most important thing that Black folks can do, and even more importantly, Black, queer, and trans folks can do, is gather together. So thank you all for taking a first step towards being co-conspirators and gathering today. So, I want to start off with my intention. I am, you might have seen from my bio, I'm a grad student at Emory University and their Women and Gender Studies department, which means I'm based in Atlanta, which is also known as Creek Territory, occupied Creek Territory. So I want to, hold a moment to, talk about who we are and why we're here. Also today, there was a vigil very recently before this, it's actually 8:20 my time over here on the East Coast, but to honor Bianca or Muffin Banks, who was a Black trans woman who was found murdered in Atlanta on January 17th. And we know, right, to disrupt these ongoing processes of violence, of dispossession, it requires us to have crucial conversations. So I hope that every time we enter a classroom, we understand that it's a day for us as educators to make a critical intervention, to have the conversations, to let our young people exist in their gender expansiveness, to exist in their truth, and be able to create a more equitable and fair and just world. So I want those to all be the anchor, right? And so now I'm going to start to actually talk about Bayard Rustin. But again, with intention, I want to talk about, where I come from. I've shared with you, I'm a Black transmasculine grad student, but I also am coming at this, as not exactly a historian, but someone who comes to history, to my lineage through a Black queer feminist lens that centers trans folks. So I want to process critically in a Black queer feminist way the history of somebody whose inheritance, whose radical inheritance and dreams are part of why I'm able to sit here before you today, but also to remember that when we honor someone's personhood, we honor their right to be complex. And so Bayard Rustin lived a life, that expanded, almost across 7 decades. And, from the time he was 30, he was very active in a wide range of civil rights issues. However, that does not mean that we have to sanitize his history, right? And it does not mean that he's above critique, because all of us, as we struggle towards freedom, have to necessarily critique and sharpen one another. And so to honor Bayard Rustin, to remove the silence of history, to celebrate the ways that he was outside of simplistic definition, I want to bring into the room the Combahee River Collective, which is a great statement if you haven't read it. Was basically the first time a whole bunch of Black lesbians who were socialists came together and created a very necessary statement written by Barbara Smith. And they have a quote there that says, "We reject pedestals. We just want to be simply human." And so what I want to work with today is, yes, first giving you a brief history of Bayard Rustin's life, but also, continuing to say that we have to reject pedestals to truly be in his lineage and his journey. So yeah, thank you. That's a perfect time to change the slide. So yeah, I hope that, we're aware, right? So Bayard Rustin's and we're gonna get into a really quick, one-on-one of his life in a second. But first, I wanna say that, we understand, or hopefully everyone logging in understands, that Bayard Rustin's first relationship and claim to fame is that he was the principal organizer of the March on Washington on August 12, 1963. And, most famously associated with that is Martin Luther King Jr. And so I hope we all know that, right? Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was so much more than the I Have a Dream speech. And when we sanitize him down to just talking points, we lose a lot of the complexity we need as students of history to continue to challenge power. So keeping with that same idea, we can't sanitize Bayard Rustin into who we want Black queer radical politics to be today. And so throughout my talk today, I'm so excited to celebrate. But I think when we ask ourselves the question, which I continue to ask myself, of how do we celebrate? How do we honor? That means letting people be full in their personhood. And so as I go through today, I'm going to talk about the points where I personally depart from Bayard Rustin and why the conditions of the time necessitated ideas, created ideas that might not resonate us today as progressives. And so, yeah, there is no singular story here, and we reject singular stories because we are endlessly complex people. And I also will drop at the very end of my talk, I made a little handout because I know we're all educators and we live for handouts. That will have some jigsaw readings and different tools you can use in the classroom, and just cite a lot of the information that I'm giving you today about Bayard Rustin's life. So the first, like I said, I'm going to sketch out a really brief summary of his life, and without further ado, I'll start doing that. So Bayard Rustin was born in 1912 in Westchester, Pennsylvania. He was born to two parents who did not have the economic means to be able to rear him. And so he was then reared by the person throughout his life who he credited, his grandmother, Julia Rustin. His family was Quaker, and this is something that we often don't remember when we speak about Bayard Rustin. A lot of his pacifist views we can directly attribute to the fact that Bayard was a Quaker, and the friends of the Quaker religion will know that they do not believe in violence and have opposed war throughout their history. So Bayard Rustin continued to live and oftentimes reflected on his life in Pennsylvania as a young person, as a very popular student, but as a student who was taught to not stand in shame. And I think we can move to the next slide if that's okay. But, in refusing shame, he also stood as a 4-star athlete and as someone who understood in high school at a very young age that he was gay. And this was something that, uncommon to a narrative that we might understand, was actually very much accepted by his grandmother. And so as he continued to come into his age, come into himself, his grandmother was aware of his romantic attraction and continued to support him to live in his ethics, to live in his morals. After high school, where he sang in the choir and, like I said, was a 4-sport athlete, he went to Wilbur College, which was a historically Black university. At Wilbur University, he was an organizer, surprise, surprise, and got into some trouble. This led to him being dismissed. He organized students around food issues and labor issues. And, after he was dismissed, went to go live with his sister. So in the 1930s, a huge issue, a huge moment, he moved to Harlem. So once in Harlem, he was there at a moment of rebirth for the city and a mass amount of cultural production. And he was able to put himself through the city of New York's public college system by actually being a singer. So I'm going to drop in the chat. A lot of people don't know this about Bayard Rustin. He actually is a fantastic singer and sang a lot of spirituals with James Farmer, who founded CORE, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So, leading up to the master strategist that was Bayard Rustin, who was able to organize the March on Washington, Bayard Rustin continued to develop his own politics. So in the 1930s, the Communist Party of the United States actually had one of the clearest lines around racial justice. They were in direct response to a Scottsboro trial, which unfortunately I don't have time to get into here. But they were able to say that the Black people in the United States deserved self-determination much earlier than, our conventional Democratic or Republican parties. So he joined the Young Communist League for 3 years in the 1930s. This was something that would later haunt his career, as he was often accused of being a communist. But he never distanced himself from that. Even though he did espouse anti-communist views later in his life, he saw this, as did W.E. Du Bois and a number of leaders at the time, as a part of his political development. So after he eventually ended up leaving the Communist Party once World War II began, and they began to distance themselves from the questions of the Black community. From there, he went on to meet A. Philip Randolph, who is the person who actually chartered the March on Washington. A. Philip Randolph was to him his most important mentor, and someone who continued to have him involved in trade unions. And he remained a trade unionist and socialist through the rest of his life. It's important, there's so much that we can talk about with Bayard Rustin's life, but I'm telling you these original sketches because it's so easy to fall into the trap of history that a person is just one event. However, Bayard Rustin, his importance in the civil rights movement ultimately came to the development of his own ideology around what nonviolence was. And this in large part happened after he met A. Philip Randolph and another gentleman named J.A. Musty, who taught him about pacifism. And this is something that brought him to all 40 states and eventually around the country and to India to study nonviolence and what nonviolence means. So once he became an expert and a scholar in nonviolence is when he was really able to learn what it meant to canvas with people and set a lot of the archetypes and blueprints for what would later become the actual March on Washington. In 1941, there was going to be a March on Washington that was forced to be canceled. And he was actually the person who came up with the idea. So it wasn't until 1963 that there was actually enough political momentum for that to happen. But again, like our movements, very similar, we can see a parallel to the summer uprisings, happened long before there's actually, necessarily people in the streets. So as he was coming into his own political ideology and ideas and studying nonviolence and meeting with folks in India, meeting with Kwame Nkrumah, who later became the first president of Ghana, he was developing a deep material analysis of conditions and a deep internationalist perspective. And as organizers, as people who want to affect change, as educators who espouse anti-racist ideas, as people who want to be able to look at our young Black folks and tell them that Black lives matter, we need to remember those lessons and carry them with us to today. So that's why I belabor the points of the beginning of his life, because if it was not for that grounding and his deep dedication to a Quaker ethic, but most importantly, what we can take from that, right, is an ethic, we might not have the Bayard Rustin who was the magnificent tactician that he was. So we can move to the next slide. So, the rest of this is really just going to be art of Bayard Rustin, because again, I want to really give us a complex view of who he is and the oftentimes contradictory viewpoints he held throughout his life. So a major point in Bayard Rustin's life happened in 1953. And for folks who are going to want to teach about Bayard Rustin in their classrooms, which, I very much recommend, this might be something that feels complicated to talk about. But again, like I'm saying, we have to be able to sit with the complexity of individuals. In 1953, he was arrested in California for having sex. And so this created an environment where, he had been arrested, and across Bayard Rustin's life, he was arrested 23 times. And so in being arrested 23 times, the majority of these are what he called moral arrests. He burned his draft card in 1943, and that's actually when the government began to survey him, but we'll get to that towards the conclusion of my talk. But he understood why he was being arrested. He was being arrested because prior to Rosa Parks, like many courageous Black folks, he refused to give up his seat on a bus. He would refuse to register for a draft. He spent 2 years in jail for that. But at this time, he was arrested for what was considered an act of perversion. And we have to realize that a majority of the people who we celebrate when we talk about Black history come from a working class position. And that it is true also of Bayard Rustin. And so folks are in direct relation with systems that criminalize them, and they're in direct relation with sex work. And that was not Bayard Rustin's truth, but I'm thinking about individuals like Malcolm X and Maya Angelou. So in talking about people, we have to understand that our young people are complex, that our folks are complex, and that we don't have to be invested in an idea of innocence to understand that someone is a hero, that all of these events actually make them their full selves, and that we can sit with those complexities and understand how they politicize our folks. So in 1953, following that arrest, he, for a moment, stepped away from formal organizing and was had his back turned. The pacifist movement, who he was largely organizing with, wanted to kind of put him on the back burner. And this is where a lot of the understanding of him behind the scenes began, because following this arrest, it was common knowledge that he was an out gay Black man, as out as someone could be in a pre-Stonewall United States. And so this would haunt him. And even on the night before the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedoms, his sexuality was talked about and debated in congressional halls. So, these are all the contexts that we have to understand too when we think about how he acted, what he spoke about, and the politics that he, the politics he stood behind, and how he thought about inclusion. So after this, he eventually got a job working for another nonprofit who took a chance on him. And with this organization, he went to Montgomery in 1955. And so in 1955, he was coming there as the energy was building around the Montgomery bus boycott. It was here that he then met a young Martin Luther King Jr. And at this moment, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who is the name that we most readily associate with nonviolence, actually didn't know a great deal about the ideology. It was through a relationship that he, had with Bayard Rustin that he learned the real precision of what it meant and the tactics that would work to fuel the later civil rights movement and would inspire the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Through these discussions, he quickly became a brain trust of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and historians widely agree that a great deal of MLK's speeches were written by Bayard Rustin at this time. They were a dynamic team and came to stand throughout the 1955 bus boycott that followed Brown v. Board Education. So together they all met and continued to work together. Now this was all fine and good until about 1958, when a Democratic Congressman, Adam Clayton Powell from New York, got word of Bayard Rustin's sexuality and threatened Martin Luther King Jr., saying that if he did not distance himself from this immoral person, that he would speculate and share widely that they were involved in an affair. As a preacher and as someone deeply committed to respectability, this was obviously a problem, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. created a commission to discuss if Bayard Rustin should remain one of his chief strategists. Embarrassed and not wanting to be forced to resign, Bayard Rustin then departed from Martin Luther King Jr. However, and this is a constant theme throughout his life, and we can move to the next slide, Bayard Rustin took this as a moment to re-energize himself and to commit himself to anti-nuclear struggle. So he went to the United Kingdom in 1958, and among 10,000 aldermen stood against nuclear bombs, and then later touched down on the continent in the Sahara to stand against the French's choice to put a bomb in Algeria to test their own nuclear power. And he actually faced arrest there as well. So the energy that Bayard Rustin displayed throughout his life is an example that we all must carry forward as we stand in these long and often difficult struggles towards a more just world and a more just future. And all of what I'm talking about right now is prior to the March on Washington. So, an anti-nuclear, a pacifist, a Quaker, having burnt draft cards, he was already coming into terms of what his own ideology were, and also already in his 40s at this time. So when we speak about Bayard Rustin, there are so many different chapters of his life, and all of them deserve the same attention and duty in our classrooms that we give other archetypes of the current United States, such as Thomas Jefferson, Nietzsche, you name it. This is a master theorist who had a global reach even in his time. And so Martin Luther King Jr. and Bayard Rustin would not meet again until 1962, when the plans were really being drawn for the March on Washington. His mentor, A. Philip Randolph, could only see Bayard Rustin as the person who was capable to organize and handle logistics for this march. So Bayard Rustin and all of the other leaders of CORE, the Southern Christian Leadership Council, which he drew up the papers for, agreed that Bayard Rustin was the person who they wanted responsible for what would be, at the time, the largest civic action towards against anti-Blackness. And so Bayard Rustin was tasked with bringing 100,000 people to the national capital. In total, it was 250,000. So almost 3 times what he was asked to do, he was able to bring from around the world. It's estimated that about 1% of all Black people in the country in 1963 were present at that march. So just a tremendous feat. And he, despite folks trying to discredit him for his early allegiance to the Young Communist League or his homosexuality, A. Philip Randolph and Martin Luther King Jr. publicly said, and had a line around this, that there is no one with more integrity that they trusted more. And in the later years of his life, he still spoke about how much that moment meant to him. And they were all aware of the fact that he was a Black gay man. And before we get into the last chapters of his life, I just wanted to bring up this graphic to say it's important, right, that we have Black queer folks in our classrooms so that students know that they are not an aberration. They are not something that the world has not seen before. Black queer people are actually always present, always there. And we have to continue to let our young people know that there are an endless amount of role models within their history that we can use to celebrate them. People who have religious and political dreams across all spectrums. So I just wanted to stop there. I found this on Instagram. I thought it was really cute. And we can move to the next slide. So thinking about the end of Bayard Rustin's life, I really want to talk about, of course, the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Again, A. Philip Randolph, his mentor, and Bayard Rustin were trade unionists. They were socialists, and they very much believed in understanding the material conditions of what was going on. So it was to force, Kennedy to create a civil rights law to include Black folks in our politics. But it also was a moment to talk about the war on poverty. And Bayard Rustin very much understood this. And he understood this in a way that he did not actually shrink himself. Again, this was someone who was not ashamed of who he was, but moved forward with pride and an understanding that there was a moral thing at hand. I think even though we can argue, and historians will probably forever, about how radical Bayard Rustin was or was not, he did show us what true militancy looked like. And so with this dedication and this moral grounding, free of obligation and guilt or fear, he was able to mobilize, probably one of the most effective protests in history, and to stand against homophobic attacks, to not deny who he was, and to build really strategic coalitions. And this continued, he was a big part of the reason why Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was in Memphis for the sanitation strike, where he unfortunately was assassinated. And, throughout his life also, again, and I want to, from a Black queer feminist lens, he attributed this to his grandmother. And so after this period, when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. died, he began to fall into a trap of inclusion where he worked very closely with LBJ, and even towards the end of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, and when I say LBJ, I mean President Johnson, he did not stand against the Vietnam War. Now, this is discordant with his early life, if you remember, because he refused to enroll in the draft in World War II and was very visible in his pacifist and Quaker values. But once that seat at the table had been given to him, he wanted to create a political program for Black people that included political inclusion. And this meant showing up for him, and this meant being able to make compromises. And that was a big part of his slogan towards his life, a politics of dislocation and a politics from protest to politics. So that is what he imagined. Without ever disavowing past versions of himself, he moved towards that more decidedly. So towards the end of his life, again, he began to drift more towards liberalism, and some people argue neoconservatism. But in the 1980s, he did begin to publicly live with a partner in a much more, his partner who's still alive and is a big part of the reason we have a lot of the interviews we have of him, Walter Nagel. And he started to openly speak for Stonewall. The ways in which he did so, I would disagree with him on, because he did not leave room in the framing, like so many of the folks on this call did, for the fact that there are beautiful, gender expansive Black queer people. It was often the gay struggle or the Black struggle in his later speeches. And we know, that we oftentimes inhabit multiple intersections at the same time. So it's important to, keep that framing as well. But he still, towards the later of his life, and you can see this in the handout, talked a lot about what it was like to be incarcerated for 22 days on a chain gang for integration, and what it was like to live through a period of time when he was fighting just for the vote. So the things I want to really end with and my time with you today is talking about what it means to be queer affirming, and how we can take that directly from Bayard Rustin's life. He did die in 1987. And so what does it mean now that we live in his legacy and that he is our ancestor? It means that we're aware of something called COINTELPRO. From 1956 on, Bayard Rustin was one of the first victims of COINTELPRO, and he was aware of this towards the end of his life. He had his phone tapped. And when I say COINTELPRO, I mean a concerted effort by J. Edgar Hoover, the first head of the FBI, to survey radical Black activists. And oftentimes this surveillance did focus on their sexual desires and intimate and family lives. So Bayard Rustin and misinformation was being spread by the state during his life. And this is something that we objectively know because of the Freedom of Information Act. And so it's important that we teach that in our classrooms, right? Like, these aren't singular stories that are happening. A lot of the groups that were forming and coming apart and together, like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, or the Black Panther Party, were directly sabotaged by the state. We can move to the next slide too. So it's important to think about COINTELPRO, to think about the realities of that, and to teach our story and to teach the fullness to our classrooms as well when we talk about the civil rights movement in the 1970s and Black Power, something that he got to see throughout his life. Also, something that I wanted to talk about is the idea of shame. Our Black queer students oftentimes, or in our Black trans students most of the time, are living through multiple systems of domination. Living in the matrix of heterosexuality means that folks are rendered invisible, and also means that they might not always want to be the representative of the various identities they inhabit at once. So how do we create classrooms where people are able to show up every day in their fullness and lean into safety? And these are questions that we have to continue to be committed to asking if we care about challenging injustice. And that's why I wanted to show this last quote. And I also wanted to say some of the reasons why historians speculate. So until 2000, there was never a book written about Bayard Rustin. And after the March on Washington in 1963, he was on the cover of Time magazine. So how could history forget someone like that? And, you know, of course, we know homophobia, right? We also know, you know, there's a particular type of homophobia that Black gay men experience, but also some people gesture to the fact that throughout his life, he had various organizational affiliations. So what does it mean to, in this moment of Black Lives Matter, when there are so many different organizations throughout the Black Lives Matter ecosystem, or the movement for Black Lives ecosystem, for us to really commit to being non-hierarchical, to living morals and ethics over an organizational affiliation, and being able to work outside of the nonprofit industrial complex. So I want to like leave those questions to think about how we remember ourselves and how we stand against charismatic leadership and what we want our contributions to be. The last major lesson from his life, I would say, is his belief in morals and ethics. He believed, and I think this is what empowered him to do so much across his life. Despite everything I said today, I've covered probably a tenth of the things that one could say about Bayard Rustin. Is he understood the moral ground. You know, he disagreed with some parts of Black power. He unfortunately was a Zionist, and at different points in times, he had, you know, really imperialist views about Vietnam and about other countries. However, he was always willing to debate and be sharpened in those morals, and also apologize at different points in times for the violence that came from his life. So understanding that complexity, understanding that people are doing the best they can with the knowledge they have, is important as we continue to be brave and have tough conversations. And then my last slide. Actually, I lied. There's one more slide after that, but this is also a really good thing too. We have to act, and that is something his life gives us, right? It's important to act. But this is the legacy of today. And so since I'm not, you know, Dr. Channing Gerard Joseph, I wanted to throw in a few other folks that we could talk about. That's Polly Murray. In the right corner near center is Marsha P. Johnson, and in the left corner is Stormy DeLarve. Stormy DeLarve and Marsha P. Johnson are both veterans of the Stonewall Riot Uprising in 1969, which if you haven't heard of, I really encourage you to do a Google search of. And in the right corner is Polly Murray, who there's actually a great movie coming out about Polly Murray's life, but was also a pre-Stonewall figure who was working around Brown v. Board education, who many folks understand today to be gender nonconforming and potentially transmasculine as well. So what I'm trying to say here is that there are so many stories to tell, and that we have to question the very idea of why we look back to history in the ways that we do, and what's the attachment we have to looking at history in that way. What can we gain from continuing to challenge the idea that there are histories of people who did great things, and understand that there are a lot of people who believe in freedom, and that those masses are what make things great. And those are Bayard Rustin's work himself when he reflected on the March on Washington. Like I said, I'm based in Atlanta, so there's an organization which I'm a member of called Southerners on New Ground. And every year when it's not a global pandemic as a result of COVID-19, as opposed to racism, there's the Bayard Rustin convening of Black and people of color. And if you are in the regional South, I would really recommend you plug in with this organization. And I am content, again, if you get anything from this, it's yes, Bayard Rustin lived a complicated, fascinating life as a brilliant strategist. And it's important for us to get, you know, find a team of people who hold similar views and come together. And so Southerners on New Ground is a regional Southern organization who works in his legacy. There's Black Youth Project 100, which I'm a member of here in Atlanta, Georgia, but is a national organization that works towards Black queer feminist organizing, who considers Bayard Rustin, you know, one of our ancestors. There's the All African People's Party for Black folks on this call, Black young people on this call in particular. And there's the Abolitionist Teaching Network, which is also grounded here in Atlanta. And so, like I said, Bayard Rustin was arrested over 23 times in his life. And we don't need to shield our young people from that. We need to question, what's the society that throws a man so brilliant, or anyone as a matter of fact, in jail? And that requires constant unlearning. And so just the last questions I have for folks that I'm still thinking of as I've been doing this deep dive to prepare to speak to you today is, what does it mean to celebrate someone's legacy? And who are our ancestors when we walk into the classroom and then we walk in our work and our purpose? What are our morals? And how do we know when we're living up to them? And what does it mean? And how do we consistently say yes to action in the way that Bayard Rustin demands that we do? And as educators or just people who believe in Black autonomy and anti-racism, how are we going to make a plan in the next week to honor Bayard Rustin? Thank y'all so much for your time. Thank you so much to these great ASL signers and interpreters. I really appreciate being able to commune with you all tonight.
Thank you so much, Victor. I really appreciate it. If y'all want to give props in the chat as you're already doing, or you can give a reaction of applause. It looks something like this. Thank you so much again, Victor. The next person I am going to call up to our virtual stage is Tiffany Haylock. Is a first-generation Latina trans lady who was born and raised in Renton, Washington. Renton. She uses she, her, hers pronouns, and she is so excited to be a part of Town Hall this evening. For more information on Tiffany, you can find Tiffany on Instagram at I'm Tiffany, BETCH. Take it away, Tiffany.
Well, hi, it's so nice to be on here. I don't know if I'm on camera, am I? Can you guys hear me okay?
You are.
Okay, perfect. Let me switch this view up. Okay. Well, it's so nice to have this, what we're doing today. I recognize my privilege as a Latina woman, but there is obviously some intersection when it comes to how people of color are treated in the educational system. So let's start off with my story. My whole life, I grew up in Renton, Washington, and I've always been a part of the Renton School District. It all starts in kindergarten, right? So kindergarten, they threw me in ESL because I had a little bit of an accent when I first went in. So they threw me into ESL. I was missing school with the other kids, and so I was at a disadvantage in that regard. And my teacher would even look down upon me. She'd look at me like, "Ugh, like, what are you?" And she'd look down upon me, and this is in a public school. It got so bad that at some point my parents got fed up, and so they had to switch me to a different program. And something that I also find very terrible is like, our district is always so hung up on diversity, and oh, we're such a diverse district, but they never talk about the separation that happens within there. There is an AM PM class that you don't have to pay for. And in a public school in Renton, Washington in 2008, I had to pay to go for a full day of school. And so that is one way to separate people. It's one way to break down people, especially financially. And I was experiencing that. In the third grade, one of my teachers just straight up didn't like me. She put me in detention every day. I got a detention on the last day of school because she was like, not doing this today. She gave me a detention when I couldn't even be in school. And so I was missing a lot of class time in that regard. And so, you know, I kept on this bad kid track. If your teachers give up on you, you give up on yourself too. You're like, ugh, whatever, what's the point in trying? I'm going to detention again today. And so I sort of started giving up. I was like, what is even the point? If I'm going to come to school and I'm going to be put in detention every day, I don't really see a point. And so I went to school to have fun. I could make friends with my detention teacher and my little detention friends, and I made it happen. And I think it definitely put me back a lot. I still have trouble with my times tables. I'm still bad at school, but it got so bad that to a point I started fifth grade. And that year is when you do a big placement test called the MSP. And because I had been missing so much class due to detention, I feel like that definitely attributed to me having worse grades on the MSP. And what the MSP decides is if you are going to be in an advanced class when you go into middle school, or a little bit lower class when you go into middle school. And so I was starting my first year of middle school. I was behind in math. I was okay at English. I was always okay at English, thank goodness, because my mom read to me and she believed in me, and she's the one that wanted me to get good at that. And so I got into that, and I worked hard. Luckily, my sister took some time into teaching me, and eventually I had enough support from my family where I could get better grades in math and get into a class that was my grade level. And I was doing so good in my 7th grade year that I don't know who it was. It was one adult that believed in me. There just had to be one person that believed in me, and they got me into the honors program of English. If that hadn't happened, I think my life would be a lot more different today. I certainly wasn't on track to do that. It came out of nowhere. I come from an immigrant family. We don't know about these things. We don't know how to sign up. And somehow it just happened, and it worked out for me. It was honestly out of sheer luck. And what happens is that within every school district, there's 2 schools. There are the kids in the honors program, and there are the kids in the remedial classes. And most likely it's going to be white and Asian kids that are going to be in these honors classes. And Black and brown kids, we are reduced to take the normal classes. I see that in every single class I've had. I've never had a Black or brown teacher. It's always white teachers in my district. And seeing that it is that way, seeing that it is so separated from kindergarten, there's these full day kids, and then they get a certain teacher, and then they get into the honors program, and then in the future they get into AP classes. If we are not giving these chances to Black and brown kids, how do we expect each other to get any better? How can we give people the opportunity to do more, really, if we're not giving the opportunity at all? I got into honors classes, thankfully, and I was able to start doing that. And that was sort of like a direct track into AP. And for me as a student, it was nice. I mean, I was able to do harder classes. I was able to challenge myself a little bit more. But if it hadn't been for that one adult that sort of believed in me, I wouldn't have been able to do it, not even today. In our senior year of high school, we also had an English teacher that she was an AP teacher, and she really believed in college. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have been able to make it in either. So if you sort of look at my whole track, I was put in detention a lot. I would have had a very different life if it hadn't been for that one adult that believed me in 7th grade. I would have had, so many other things stacked against me if just that one person didn't decide to, let's put this person in honors this year. And because of that person's decision, I was more on track to go to college. I'm going to the University of Washington at Bothell now, and I've had the chance to go to school, and I recognize my privilege in that. What I want to let everybody know today is that that shouldn't happen. My parents should have known about that opportunity since the first day. There should have been more adults in my past that would have said, hey, don't go to detention every day. Let me ask you what's going on. Let me ask you how I can support you and not give up on you. I would have loved to have more adults that believed in me. But unfortunately, that's just not the school system. If there is any youth out there listening to this right now, I want to tell you that sometimes as people of color, we're not given the best opportunities in this world. Sometimes we have to reach out there and get it. And even though it can be really hard, it's worth it. And it's very hard to work hard. And, I really wish that adults would put more effort into that. If I'm reaching out to teachers today, and I wish that more adults would commit to being that change in people's future. Tell kids about AP programs. Tell kids that they can do more than just detention. Don't shove kids in detention, period. I think that we can really make a change in people's lives by sharing some of these things that are a little bit separatist. The AP and honors program shouldn't be something that is kept from so many people. It shouldn't be the same people that go into the same class their whole lives. we should have a little bit more diversity there. I would have loved to see more Black people. I would have loved to see more Latinos in my AP and honors classes. And, you know, directly that would also cause more Black and brown people to go to college because we're setting each other up for this. So what we can take from this is, if I have any youth listening to me right now, reach out. You can ask me, you can ask your counselors. Unfortunately, sometimes things are not handed to us, and so we need to find our resources and work 10 times as harder as our white and Asian counterparts. It's unfortunate, but it has to be done. For the adults, if we are so committed to Black and brown youth and education, I want the adults to be committed to telling about everything that's out there. I want adults to be committed to our education, to seeing us as lawyers and doctors and professionals, and as college bound, to seeing us as worthy of your time and not just attention. And with that, I thank you guys so much for your time. I would love to get any questions today from anybody that wants to reach out. My Instagram is, like they said, I'm Tiffany Betch, and I'd love to hear anything that you guys have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tiffany. We really appreciate your story and being here and saying all of that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the next person I am going to call to our virtual stage. I'm still, oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm not. All right. Yeah. I'm having a transparent moment. Educators, be with me on this one. And so, yeah, we're going right into, let's see here. Going right into the Q&A. Okay, so we have a young person by the name of A on, as well as Tiffany. And y'all are going to ask questions. I ask that you keep it to about 2 minutes. And any folks that are part of the organizational of all of this, I'm going to be transparent once again. Please correct me if I'm wrong at any point in time. I am open to that at any point. Cool. Feel free to ask any questions. We will be going by a progressive stacking situation. So with young people to the front, as well as white men and white folks to the back of that. So if you do have a question, please feel free to ask in the chat. Cool. Yes, I will. So I'm going to start it off if that's okay. I'm going to ask both Tiffany and A, what do you think is the most impactful way educators can engage with students in a classroom setting?
Do you want to go?
Oh, you can go first if you want.
Okay. So I'm only a high school freshman. I've been doing school for more than half my life now, and I feel like teachers can try to make more of an effort to connect with Black and brown students and queer students because we got to work, 3 times as hard to just barely get to the place where it feels like straight cis white students kind of get automatically when they walk in on the first day.
I think that the way educators can really reach out a little bit better is by understanding people's stories. I think some of my best teachers that have helped me out in my career have been the ones that know what I want to do when I grow up. They know me as a person. They saw me as a little kid putting my makeup on in the hallways of Lindbergh High School. These are people that saw me grow up and saw me work hard to express my passions. So as an educator, the best that you can do is learning about people, taking some time. You could even make it an assignment. Something that I did my freshman year is it was an English class and they had all of us write what our future career was going to be. And then we had to write how we were going to get there, what schools we were going to go to get there. And that teacher was the one that helped me get into college, Mrs. Ray. I'll always be grateful for her. And that's the way that you can really get to help your students is by knowing them and knowing how to help them better themselves or help them achieve their dreams.
Thank you both for that. That was, and because I'm a Venus and Leo, I'm also going to answer the question. And that is having an authentic connection. Because it was those teachers that were like, that I had authentic connections with that could call me out on what I was doing. But if I didn't have all that authentic connection, you're just another adult. I don't want to hear it. You know what I mean? Anyway, moving forward, does anyone have any questions for our speakers? Oh, and you know I can wait in an awkward silence, so we can be here all day.
I can go. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Sorry, let me take this off. I'm in two computers because I have a family and I'm cooking something. I'm just the version of tears, and I'm just gonna keep it short. I'm just so grateful for what I just hear from Tiffany. I work with mostly international students from Central Latin America. I myself have a very strong accent. I also work with Middle Eastern students, Filipino students. You have an incredible story. This is a story of a lot of my students. This is my story. Thank you so much for putting yourself out there.
Thank you so much. It's really good to hear that my story touched you. I'm really grateful for the work that you do, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, it's so warm right here. It's like I have feelings. Who am I kidding? I'm a Cancer sun. I have all the feelings. Let me stop. Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions for our speakers?
Hey, I have a question. Wondering how you think that education would look if educators actively were doing this work and teaching these things all the time in their classrooms. What impact would it have had on you as students, and what impact can it have on students in the future?
For me specifically, well, I still haven't come out at my school. It's kind of like, if you, like, you'll find out once, you know, I have a partner and we're holding hands in the hallway. But I was just scared to come out, especially in middle school, because there was this one person, and they came out as non-binary and bisexual, and they had a terrible experience. You didn't even have to be there to witness it. You just had to hear it. But I was there witnessing the bad things that students were doing and the way that teachers were treating them. And I feel like if this stuff was just taught more, it would be, like, schools would be a safer place, I feel like.
I agree with that too. Kids should feel safe to, you know, be in the school and be a part of that. Like for me, it would look like I want to see Black and brown kids in AP classes. I want to see our curriculums touch on very hard racial topics in this country without the one Black kid in AP feeling uncomfortable. Why is there only one person of color in this whole classroom and make them feel uncomfortable? I want it to be diverse. I want not for there to be two schools within one. I want it to be a mix. I want to see people like me in AP and honors classes, and even better, I want to see people that look like me teaching these classes.
Thank you so much. There is a question in the chat that says, could you expand on, so how would you put someone like Bayard into the curriculum, or add these people in if they're not already there? Like you mentioned, Thomas Jefferson gets too much airtime. What? Sorry, go ahead. Was that a question for Victor, by the way? Do you see that in the chat, Victor?
Yeah, no, I heard you.
Okay, cool.
I was like, yeah, I just feel like this was the youth time. So I was like, But yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of educators across the country who have begun to create lesson plans that include gender expansive Black and Brown folks and who talk about Stonewall and other major events outside of that. I know that in 2014, when I took the AP US History test, there was a question about Stonewall on there. So these conversations are crucial and happening. And our students need them. You know, Black Lives Matter has remained a youth-led movement, and our young people, we know, do best when they have mirrors for themselves in the classroom. So in the handout I had, there's an organization called One Archive, and then there's also rustin.org that is listed at the very top. Those are full out lesson plans that have primary sources. That would be a way to do that. And I think also, right, like, of course, there's Common Core and standards and all those things. And if you don't live in California where ethnic studies is required, there might be some time that you have to give to folks like Thomas Jefferson, but that doesn't mean that you can't contextualize them, because we know as educators, our job first and foremost is to give our students analytical skills to be able to think and develop conclusions for themselves. And that means talking about the fact that there was always folks dissenting, you know, that this long civil rights movement extended much longer beyond 1963. And that, yeah, not everybody was assassinated. And that, yeah, there are many, many voices that created the world we have today. There's a quote, I believe it's by Ella Baker, that said, you know, the movement made Martin, Martin didn't make the movement. And so when we honor him every year, perfect time to talk about Bayard Rustin, perfect time to talk about Fannie Lou Hamer. Fannie Lou Hamer is someone who Bayard Rustin continuously elevated later on in his life. My dog wanted to be featured, but continuously honored in his life when he was asked about the civil rights movement. So it's really important to have our students understand this chorus of voices. But yeah, I want to defer this to the youth too, because I know when I was a young Black trans student, I just wanted to be asked about what works in the classroom. So thank you.
Thank you. I actually have another question here for both Tiffany and A. What would a queer affirming, trans affirming, Black Lives Matter school look like? And what would the teachers be like?
I think it would just be, it's kind of hard to explain, but like I want to see queer teachers. I want to see transgender teachers, teachers of all races, colors, everything. Like I feel like that would be so important for students to see, because you know, sometimes the teacher is just like a person telling an adult telling you what to do. But if you can connect with them on a deeper level, like sexuality wise, gender wise, whatever wise, that would help students a whole lot.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, that was great. You definitely said that.
For me, I think especially within like higher grades, you see everybody grouping into like cliques. If teachers did a better job of mixing up groups and making sure that we get a better idea of each other, then maybe the queer kids won't feel so weird. They won't feel like they're apart from everybody or they're getting into the team, because that's being ostracized is such a big factor into somebody's self-esteem. If we taught kids that we can be, you know, we can be together, we can work together. It's okay to work with somebody that doesn't look like you or somebody that identifies differently than you. Maybe the kids in the GSA won't be looked down upon. It starts in the classroom, and mixing up the groups will, I think, will work really well. And I think also putting into the curriculum how to connect with others. I don't know how you guys are going to do it. It's really hard to put stuff into curriculum, but I think that would be very important.
Thank you so much for that. I was actually just talking to someone. I'm in college because we're going to talk about me again. I'm in college and I have a professor in one of my business classes who is a Black woman, MBA. And when I was sitting there, I was sort of thinking about this, and I'm 37 years old. And that is the second Black teacher I've ever had in my entire schooling career. So it's important to remember who that is and what that is to people. But the next question, just really easy here. How can teachers challenge gender normativity in the classroom through their own gender performance? And what responsibility do they have to not reinforce gender norms in how they express their gender? Don't worry, it's easy, no problem.
You can go, Tiffany.
Okay. So I think, oh gosh, I'm thinking about some male and female teachers. They identify on a binary. And, I don't think there's anything wrong with that or anything like with, there's nothing wrong with being yourself. I think the problem that I see is when teachers sort of look at kids that are different weirdly. In middle school, there was a science teacher and he was like, we need to tolerate each other. We don't need to necessarily agree with each other, but we need to tolerate each other. Are you kidding me? You're over here trying to teach tolerance and you're like this old straight white guy. Come on. Be comfortable within yourselves, my dearest teachers. And, I think if, don't look at people weird. Just be, comfortable in yourself. I had Mr. Heinschel, he was my, he was my language arts teacher. He was like, in our curriculum, he actually addressed toxic masculinity and he addressed his own. He was like, coming out to us and he was like, so guys, I drive a Prius and I am comfortable with driving this Prius. And just even little stuff like that, he's like breaking down toxic masculinity and saying why that is a problem. So my thing is address the problems, be comfortable within yourself, and treat other people with respect. I think that's just the way to go.
Thank you very much, Tiffany, for that. Love it. Did you have anything to add? Sorry, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I was just going to say I agree with everything that you said, and I feel like in examples that teachers give, like let's say math, for example, you can have a problem that said, for example, Alina and her girlfriend, or Jesse bought apples, they blah, 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 blah. Like just putting those in there, it's small things, but it means a lot.
Thank you. There's some great points in the chat. Vulnerability matters also. How can we as educators expect our young people to open up if we are not also open and vulnerable with them? That's very true. Tiffany mentioned that she struggled with math. Do you feel that you may have struggled because you did not see yourself in your math classrooms? And do you have any suggestions on how math educators can change that? I know math is just a hard subject to talk about in general, so I'm going to let you have that, Tiffany.
For me, it was again, we had diverse classrooms, but for me, it was the overt action of kicking me out of the math class. It was the overt action of not even allowing me to be present to learn. I had to reach out to my own family members who learned in El Salvador how to do math. And that's how I learned math from my family. For me, it was more, not necessarily not seeing myself, because there was a good amount of people of color, but if you're kicking them all out, what's the point? So yeah, that's what it is for me. For educators to make it a little bit better, I would see it's good what you're teaching. I would say maybe be a little bit more patient because not everybody comes from the same background. Some kids are, of course, going to take a little while longer to learn, or you never know what other kids are facing at home, or if they got kicked out of class the whole year before. And so some kids require different types of attention. And like I said before, that definitely takes knowing them.
Wow, thank you so much. And we have time for, as far as I know, we have some more time for more questions. So don't feel like, actually there was one that I know about for sure. Here it is. I am always curious how white educators can best be allies in the educational setting beyond exposing students to stories of Bayard and COINTELPRO, etc. And you can feel free to answer that however way you like.
Do you want to go first?
I honestly don't know.
That's fair. Thank you for being honest with that. As an adult, I probably would have danced around that question for a really long time. But go ahead, Tiffany. Did you have an answer?
I have, a real answer. Caucasians are going to be Caucasians. And that is something that you can't stop. That is something that will always be there. What white educators can do is try to understand a little bit more about different cultures, I think, and trying to, I don't know, just learn about different people. For me, it's like the effort that people take into learning about others and how they come off, because you can be a white educator and you can be chill, but if you don't address your own privilege and if you don't recognize the differences that there are, then I think that's where it could get bad. And so for me, it's just learning more about people. Yeah.
I think something that resonates with me is that my mentor used to tell me all the time, get out of your own way. And because sometimes it's you is the barrier to getting to the next thing. There is a very long link for white folks who teach in the hood and the rest of y'all to, it's a book that you can purchase, I'm assuming. Yes, somebody believes this book is great. Wonderful. All right, any other questions? Can we, Oh, I think what they think they were asking was just like, what other strategies do white folks teach, white educators have? I'm just clarifying something that I saw in the chat. Cool. All right, great. Are there any other questions, comments, praises, celebrations?
You guys can for real ask me anything, like shoot away, ask me about anything at all.
What did you have for breakfast today, Tiffany?
Ooh, well, I didn't have breakfast, but I had so I work at Walmart. And so I had a huge plate. I had barbecue chicken wings. And then I had a little bit of mashed potatoes and gravy on top, and then some mozzarella sticks and a banana milkshake.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, that's why I have so much energy today.
Yes, because you are fed. Let me tell you. What did you have for breakfast today? Did you eat today?
I had kiwi for breakfast before school, so.
Nice. Before school, oh my God, I love it. All the things, a fruit before school. I love it. That is the greatest ever. Does any, Alex is asking, does somebody have one?
Yeah, I like to add something. Sorry, I'm gonna take this off. I'm in two devices, it's so hard. Really quickly, I want to say, from my experience, it's so important to know children's history, and it's so important to know the history of the countries from where our students come from. I have heard so many times colleagues, teachers, history teachers saying the United States is the best country in the world. Why? Just ask yourselves why. Like, I feel like hearing a history teacher saying that in the classroom is so harmful for the students, for immigrant students. Just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. It's really important because it also gives you a basis of where they're coming from when communicating with another young person. There was another comment for adults. Can we please normalize apologizing to students? That's my comment, not my comment. It was somebody in the chat. And then, what creative spaces do you wish you had access to in life in school? What spaces do we elementary school teachers need to make more room for?
I think it was,
Oh.
You can go first.
Sorry. For the question about elementary school teachers, just leave room for creativity. If there is a kid and you look at the kid and you see a guy and that child comes in wearing a dress, don't look at the kid funny. Like let kids express their creativity, because that's just kind of all they have to go off of at that time.
I totally agree. I think just giving kids the freedom to explore is so important. I feel like a lot of things, especially when I was growing up, were very gendered. And so the boys and girls would be separated. We'd be separated for PE. There was a lot of separation going on. And so I think that makes young queer kids uncomfortable. And so I think something that I would think is very important is doing a little bit more mixing. Let the boys play with the dolls and let the girls play with the different sports equipment. It doesn't have to be so separated. I think kids should have access to play because kids don't know any better. They don't know about any gender norms that are out there just yet. They're just learning about stuff and being creative. They shouldn't feel bad about it.
One more thing I want to add on to that is don't have gender roles in your class, because in my 5th grade, my teacher would be like, I need a big, strong boy to come and refill the water. That can hurt someone, like a guy or a girl. It can hurt someone when a teacher says that, and they might not mean anything negative by it, but yeah, gender roles is a no-go.
Thank you for that. I'm also dropping in the chat. Flamingo Rampant is a publishing company that does young books for young people in the elementary age group that have a lot of representation of BIPOC folks, different religions. And one book I really want to just rave about is A Princess of Great Daring. A princess discovers that she is a princess and also wants to save herself. Right. So like she gets to play all the roles, which is pretty cool. So anybody, yeah, totally. Yeah, and if folks have any other general questions about the org, its work, for Tiffany or anybody here, please feel free.
I got like one question up here from somebody named Alex. Why did they keep putting you in detention or out of math class? I honestly don't know why. Educators, like, if you're putting kids out of class and they don't know why, I think that's really bad. One time I got put out of class for making silly faces. Kids are gonna be kids, and I got put out of class for making silly faces. One time I was talking during a movie. Lots of kids do that. You could say, hey, stop that. Or you could put somebody in detention and miss class time. So I think for me, the escalation of situations was always very high. And my punishments were a lot harder than my white counterparts. And so for that reason, I got sent to detention all the time. I think the teacher just didn't like me, in all honesty. And I don't think I was necessarily a bad kid. Like, I would do my work and I would talk to different students and like, just chill in the classroom. But because that teacher like did not like me, I don't know. I just got put into detention all the time.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the response. If folks don't have any other questions, I'd love to close out this portion with a poem. Does that feel okay? So I have a question for the organizers of this. Am I allowed to say the F word on this Zoom, or is that not a thing? Or is that?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
great. Wonderful, great. I don't want to put my F words in places they are not wanted or welcome. But if y'all are in there, then I am too. So something that I like to remind myself of is that when we do this work of justice or of liberation, is that we remember that we are human and that we're also going to mess up. And the biggest part is getting back up again, acknowledging our mistake and moving forward again. Yeah. So with that, I give you all of my humanness in this one poem. I've been in and out of the Pacific Ocean, across this wretchedly, get ready because the F words are coming, okay? Just so everybody knows. Okay, I just want to make sure you're prepared for them. I've been in and out of the Pacific Ocean, across this wretchedly beautiful fuckery of borders we call country, been to love, but never through it. 2 puberties. Let me stop the poem right here. I've been through 2 puberties. I'm exhausted, okay? A library wall filled with unfinished books on heartbreak, about 13 breakdowns and only 2 breakthroughs. And I've driven 1 million more internet miles from out of the weather of raining expectations and unpredictions to this gallery of skeletons to tell all of you, make a fucking mistake. I watched a Facebook video wherein the bass drummer of an orchestra hit his note with so much passion, the drum mallet flew from his hands and hit the triangle player square in the face. The song never missed a note, but I imagine in another dimension, that woman yelled, "Fuck," so loudly. It bounced off the walls of the amphitheater and into the mouths of the pearl necklace wealthy white women, and fuck, 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 fuck became the best remix the symphony has ever heard. My mother is not as out of her mind as I make her out to be, probably. But she had to have been, to have created an offspring with the man I'm supposed to call father on purpose, and that makes me a mistake. But look at what this mistake can do. Look how many lives I've lived. Look how many people can love me. Look how I can learn and change and grow and evolve. Look at the moon. I've read somewhere that a former planet shoulder checked a piece of our planet and that piece got captured in the orbit. We call her the moon. There's a science teacher that's going to tell me I'm wrong, but I'm going to go with it. And that's okay, right? We're all learning. It's okay. All right. It was in there. It was in a book. I promise. It was in a textbook. And I think that she had the opportunity to roam the entire universe, but she fell so in love with our faces that she committed her body to be on night watch for eternity. Tell me you can't find the beauty in mistakes. I've lost a lot of friends, life, sanity, time, making mistakes, but I can only hope that I walk this life differently because of them. Next time I will be so much better, I promise. Tomorrow, I will stand in front of a person I've never even I will stand in front of a person I've never even felt worthy of looking at. She pays all her bills on time, and she wakes up early to like go to yoga or something, and she makes her mom proud, and I will say, make a mistake with me. I've lived on this broken piece of rock for 37 years, and I've never been right about anything. So why would I be right about you? So come with me. We'll spill our combined traumas under each other's shirts and let's feel really uncomfortable about what we said out loud. Let's go to the wrong airport on the wrong day and still get on the plane when it's actually time. To err is human. So let's be so human. Our flesh stinks of fuck up. It'll be my fault, your bad, and our misstep. And let's just do better next time. I'm sorry in advance for tripping on you. I'm sorry if my drumstick hits your face, but the beat is different now. And F, it's beautiful. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us. To Victor Ultra Omni, to Tiffany Hatlock and the Youth A, and Laura Martinez, and Dresden, and Neil, and Steph Price, and Darren Hoop, and anybody else I did not mention. Y'all are so great, and thank you for being here and learning so much. My name is Ebo, and you can find me on ebobarton.com. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ebo. Some folks are leaving. I just want to let you all know there is a link to some resource documents in the chat that were compiled, just, if you want to learn more. And also, if we are going to stop the live stream here in just a second. So if anybody has any questions or thoughts that they want to share that are not like on camera, just something that you were holding back, something you want to say, there, we have a few minutes if you want to do that. That is a thing. So we'll just hang here for a minute, but I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you to Ebo and Victor and Tiffany and AJ. Incredible words that all of you spoke.
Thank you so much. You guys are so welcome to reach out to me in private on my Instagram if you have any questions about school or any questions about reaching out, or you need any resources. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction in the best way that I can. And for everybody out there, thank you so much for coming today. And thank you for having me.
And I totally forgot something. I forgot to say Venmo shout outs. I'm going to put some more Venmo shout outs on that link. If you are able to, please consider attributing for the labor of Ebo, of Tiffany. Hopefully I'll get AJ's information, for our interpreters, for Laura, for Dresden, for Neil, for Victor. Shout out to them and show your appreciation on Venmo. We'll get you that.